There is a time bomb ready to explode the whole world at this very moment. We do not know exactly when it will explode, but we know that one day it will. And the worst part is, we have known about this problem for a long time, but we all make a point of collectively ignoring it. Speaking like this, you might even think that this video is going to talk about nuclear wars or some other great threat to the world population, like a new disease starting to spread. But no, this video is about something you create every day. And unlike those other threats that are real but beyond your reach, in this video you are part of the problem, but you are also part of the solution. Do you know what happens to the things you throw in the trash?
Hey, Pedro here. This video you are watching was originally in Portuguese, my native language. This is the attempt of our team to translate it to English, and I sincerely hope you enjoy it. Your feedback is extremely important to us. Now, back to the video.
This question is simple, but if you stop to think, what seems like a puddle is actually as deep as an ocean. And in our search for answers, we will encounter $1 billion market hidden from us. We will discover negative defects in the human body that we have only recently begun to understand. And at the same time, we will see that many modern problems are the same as those from the past, just dressed in new clothes. If you watch this video until the end, you will closely follow a story that begins with the waste our ancestors left behind, goes through the creation of a material that seems magical, but at the same time contaminates those not yet born, and reaches the story of how we became a civilization that depends on circuits to advance technologically and solve its problems, while creating the most dangerous and toxic waste that exists, electronic waste, which is also the fastest growing type of waste every year. I hope this will be the most interesting video about waste you will see. It is fascinating how much we can discover about a population just by looking at what is discarded. A natural consequence of the existence of human beings is that we leave things behind, such as tools, cut bones, or food scraps. What was once considered unwanted by someone and hidden years ago in the past, in the present, becomes a true treasure for archaeologists to help us decipher our history. Notice that I did not call these discarded items waste. Even today, we do not have a good definition of waste that applies to all cases. Even so, each person alive today produces on average 740 grams of waste per day. In 2016, a total of 2 billion tons of waste were produced by all of us. And this number keeps growing year after year. It is estimated that this amount generated every year will almost double by 2050. But these numbers do not represent what is really happening. The amount of waste generated varies greatly from country to country, especially between developed and developing countries. Each citizen in the United States generates on average 2.21 kilograms of waste per day, while in Brazil, each citizen generates half of that, about 1 kilogram. And in sub-Saharan Africa, each person generates half of what a Brazilian does, only 460 grams of waste per day. And the type of waste also changes. The lower the average income of a country or region, the more the waste is organic, such as food and plants. But as income increases, so does the percentage of paper and plastic. We literally are, or at least at some point were, what we throw away. It is both frightening and fascinating how much information we can obtain just by analyzing the waste produced in each country. And yet, we seem to know very little about waste itself. I repeat the question. Do you know what happens to what you throw in the trash? Most people have no idea. And if we want to go further and truly understand the problem we are facing so that we can move beyond simplistic solutions, which, as we will see, often do not work, we need to look at our waste with the same interest we have in knowing how the universe came to be or how some cutting-edge electronic equipment is made. To understand how this became the gigantic problem it is today, we need to go back to the beginning, when you were still a baby. For most of human history, the term disposable didn't mean much. People wanted the opposite. Tools and utensils that practically lasted a lifetime were common and meant less spending on acquiring them. But everything changed around 1943, when disposable diapers were invented thanks to a revolutionary new material, plastic. Depending on your age or where you are from, you, your parents, or your grandparents probably used those cloth diapers, which needed to be washed constantly for very obvious reasons. With the invention of disposable diapers, the very concept of disposable began to have a positive connotation. If before a father or mother spent hours of their day washing and changing their children, now the whole process was done in a much more practical way. It was just a matter of discarding the used diaper and putting on a new one. Babies use between 4,000 and 6,000 diapers until they learn to use the toilet. It's not very difficult to do the math and see that this has given rise to a highly lucrative market, which in 2023 generated over $60 billion. But the idea of disposable things didn't stop at diapers. Driven by this new magical and cheap material, plastic, suddenly being disposable, became a desirable feature among consumers, precisely because of the idea of convenience and ease. Take plastic bottles, for example. Annually, more than 480 billion of them are sold worldwide. And in a world where even our food is packaged in plastic, it's no wonder that it alone accounts for 12% of all the waste generated globally. And this is where our problems begin. Where does all this waste go? The answer also depends on the country. In Brazil, the most common destinations are dumps, and understanding the difference between them and sanitary landfills is extremely important. In a dump, all waste is dumped on the ground without any treatment or planning. And this is the worst possible destination for waste. There are 4 main types of waste. Dry, like plastic and paper. Wet, like the lunch you left on your plate. Hazardous waste, like batteries. And waste, which is generally not reusable. Each of them has a different impact on the environment, and understanding them is extremely important for knowing what to do next. Wet waste decomposes and in the process emits various gases. One of them is methane, which is 100 times more efficient at absorbing heat than carbon dioxide. It is estimated that the contribution of this methane emitted by decomposing organic matter is equivalent to 5% of all greenhouse gases emitted by humans. This is more than what is emitted by all aviation, and yet we hear more about the impact of aviation on carbon emissions than about the improper disposal of organic waste. In addition to the gases emitted during decomposition, a dark liquid forms, the leachate. The exact composition of the leachate varies according to the waste found at the site. As the rain penetrates the layers of waste, the leachate can become even more contaminated. Medications improperly disposed of, or even electronic equipment, which I will talk more about shortly, can accumulate toxic substances and heavy metals in leachate. Since dumps do not have a structure designed to handle this, in fact they have no structure at all, the leachate is absorbed by the soil, contaminating it, and it can even penetrate and reach aquifers, contaminating the water that many people and animals depend on. The story changes when we talk about sanitary landfills, which are the planned and structured version of waste disposal. In a sanitary landfill, the soil is prepared with an impermeable layer to prevent leachate from penetrating and contaminating the surrounding area or even reaching the groundwater. They also have mechanisms to remove methane and gases produced during the decomposition of waste. In some landfills, this gas is used to generate energy. The problem is that, in Brazil, almost half of the waste ends up in inappropriate places, such as dumps. And this is true for practically all developing countries. Building the proper infrastructure is expensive, and people do not care enough about waste to demand that those responsible ensure the best possible final destination for their waste. And honestly, can we blame these people? This is the time to be realistic. We are talking about countries like Brazil, where almost half of the population still does not have sewage collection. Many of us who live in urban areas have no idea about the reality of the rest of our country, let alone the entire rest of the global south. It's not just the waste infrastructure that needs major investments, it's practically the entire infrastructure. We still have a long road ahead, and as if that weren't enough, we have the one who started this story: plastic. One of the best features of the material that revolutionized humanity, its durability, is also one of the biggest problems. Improperly discarded plastic can be carried by rain and wind to rivers, where it causes problems for the entire ecosystem and often ends up in the oceans. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch is one of the consequences. It is an area twice the size of Texas or 3 times the size of France, which accumulates around 80,000 tons of waste, mainly plastic, thanks to ocean currents. If you think the main ones affected are turtles, I think you better prepare yourself. In 2004, we discovered that ultraviolet light causes plastic to degrade into very small particles, microplastics. And they have been accumulating in the oceans since this material was invented. These particles can enter both our cells and those of the animals that make up the food chain. And we have barely begun to discover the true impact that microplastics have on our health. Microplastics enter the water cycle and literally rain down on continents, turning the problem from the oceans into a global one. And we have no idea how to remove them from the environment. They are even in the air you breathe. Even biodegradable plastics, which are often pointed out as a solution to this problem, do not always decompose correctly. Some may even turn into microplastics faster than regular plastic. The impact of microplastics is so profound that they are currently detected in blood samples of practically all people, including fetuses, as they have even been found in human placentas. Stop and think about it. Even before you know if your child is a boy or a girl, you know they have microplastics. But hold on, I warned that we would deep dive into this topic. We still need to talk about the most valuable waste there is. I know that trash and valuable are 2 words you might not expect to see in the same sentence. Even less so when we can also add other words to describe it, like dangerous and toxic. Year after year, we are adding a very specific type of waste to the environment: electronic waste. It poses a particular danger when thrown into regular trash, largely due to the batteries. Both landfills and dumps are environments that accumulate flammable gases such as methane, and as batteries decompose, they can start fires that are difficult to extinguish. Moreover, during transportation and the recycling process, batteries are easily punctured or have their outer protection damaged. An interesting fact: lithium, the main component of batteries, is never found in its pure form in nature. The reason is that it is so chemically reactive that it ends up joining with other atoms to form compounds. And it is precisely this reactivity that makes it the best material we know for building batteries. And that frequently also causes fires in dumps, landfills, and recycling plants. That is why batteries need to be disposed of as electronic and hazardous waste. And yet every day many people improperly dispose of batteries. Perhaps because they do not understand that by doing so, they are putting others in danger. In fact, the disposal of electronic waste causes problems as serious as those caused by plastic. A modern cell phone is a walking periodic table. They can contain more than 70 elements ranging from iron, gold, and copper to rare earth metals like neodymium, which is widely used in magnets. But when improperly disposed of, the impacts are serious. The metals decompose and corrode over time. And little by little, they infiltrate the soil. Once in the soil, they are absorbed by plants and bacteria that serve as food for other animals, several of which we eat. In addition to metals, electronic waste also releases highly toxic compounds such as PFAS, known as forever chemicals. And the name was given precisely because of their chemical stability. Once in the human body, they bind with our molecules and are so stable that it is practically impossible for them to be removed. We now know that they are connected to various diseases, from cancer to obesity, and studies in the United States indicate that approximately 98% of the American population already has PFAS in their bodies. If you are still not convinced of how problematic electronic waste is when improperly disposed of, stop and think about what happens when these metals and toxic compounds reach the oceans. A very recent study identified the presence of heavy metals in all canned sardines tested in Brazil. And it goes further to say that the results indicate it is not safe to consume canned sardines from Brazil. The study does not directly link these metals to electronic waste, but we know that the oceans are being contaminated with heavy metals, and it's our fault. But there is a place in the world where the negative impacts of electronic waste have been so thoroughly studied that they serve as a lesson and appear in practically every article on the topic. The city of Guiyou in China is known as the world's e-waste capital. And contrary to what you might imagine, most of it is imported from other countries. It used to be a rice-producing city, but after the importation of electronic waste began, agriculture no longer works because the crops do not grow in the toxic and contaminated soil. A 2007 study indicated that 80% of children under the age of 6 tested were suffering from lead contamination. However, it is extremely important to remember that this is a consequence of improper electronic waste processing. There was no regulation at the time, and most workers operated without any safety equipment. And the motivation is not difficult to understand. Electronic waste is considered the most valuable waste there is. But what was done in Guiyou was not recycling, it was scavenging. So much so that the Chinese government later banned and shut down these places. The fact I'm about to share may seem unbelievable, but it is true. Per ton, electronic waste contains 100 times more gold than gold ore itself. The same is true for various other metals. If you don't believe me, just look at this rock, which is actually an 860 kilogram gold ore. It would need to be processed entirely to result in the 30 grams of gold that are on top of the red fabric. And before you think it's a good idea to open up the electronics you have at home to extract the metals yourself, that's exactly how the people of Guiyou got contaminated with forever chemicals and heavy metals. Recycling electronic waste is a much more complex process than it seems, and it goes far beyond just opening a cell phone to take out what's inside. You won't be able to do this at home without dangerously exposing yourself to heavy metals and highly toxic chemicals. You need cutting-edge technology and environmental licenses, things you won't have at home. But even though it is the most valuable waste there is, only 22% of electronic waste is recycled. And the fate of the remaining 78% is still very uncertain. We do not know. All we have are estimates. In Brazil, a significant portion of electronic waste ends up in dumps and landfills. We are far from properly disposing of our electronics. Test it yourself, especially if you live in a large urban center. Walk down the street and see how many old washing machines, refrigerators, and televisions you will find in vacant lots. We usually think of electronic waste as being just cell phones and computers. But everything that has plugs, wires, or batteries is considered electronic waste. This includes everything from headphones to refrigerators. The question then is, How can we properly dispose of this waste? Samsung has a program called Samsung Recycle. The unique feature is that if you have large electronic equipment, like a washing machine or a refrigerator that you want to dispose of, they will pick it up from your home. And it doesn't matter the brand. Once discarded, your equipment will be dismantled, processed, and reinserted into the production chain. One of the advantages is that, in addition to preventing soil and water contamination, electronic waste recycling also reduces the carbon impact. Copper, for example, emits 65% less carbon dioxide when recycled than when mined. What Samsung does through Samsung Recycle is called a circular economy, which is one of the promises for the proper treatment, not only of electronic waste, but of waste in general. Speaking of a circular economy, it is one of the most talked about terms when it comes to solving the problem of electronic waste. So, it's good that we leave this video understanding exactly how it can help. For most of human history, we did not care much about the origin of the materials we used to build the world around us. And the impact of this on the environment is becoming increasingly clear. In general terms, the idea of a circular economy is to keep products and materials in use for as long as possible. And there are several ways to make this happen. It is in dealing with electronic waste that the idea of a circular economy shines. You may have already been introduced to the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. But did you know they are in order of effectiveness? With electronic waste recycling, like what Samsung does through Samsung Recycle, we are acting on the last R, recycling. And by doing so, we give a new life to extremely useful materials that would otherwise be discarded and disappear from the production chain. What this means in practice is that by recycling, we also reduce, which is the first R, because we are preventing materials like copper, lithium, and gold from needing to be extracted from the earth to be turned into new products. And this is where the magic becomes clear. Transforming electronic waste back into materials we can use consumes less energy and has a smaller negative impact on the environment than extracting the same resources from the earth. And then there's the second R, reuse, which is literally about extending the lifespan of every electronic device that exists. After you listen to me talking about all this data, it's possible that the point of the video wasn't clear. The message I want to convey is that there is no such thing as throwing trash away. It will come back to you, whether in microplastics or in some other way. Understanding this is vital for us to truly find ways to deal with the problem. We usually hide our trash or send it far away where we can't see it, imagining that it won't bother us anymore. But to solve the problem, we will need to talk a lot about our impacts and our waste in the world. There are excellent examples of what to do with waste, such as paper recycling, which in some countries already exceeds 80%. For some other types of waste, such as plastic, the solution seems to be a mix of recycling along with reducing its use. Plastic is one of the materials that has helped us build the modern world. And indeed, we need it for extremely important applications such as medicine. But do we really need to package batteries, broccoli, and toothbrushes in so much plastic? Isn't there another way? Even in the mining sector, the last place many of us would expect to see a positive example in this video, the scenario seems to be gradually changing. We still rely on mining new resources, but the situation seems to be changing. 44% of the copper used today by the European Union is already recycled. And if you think that in Brazil we are lagging behind, know that we are world leaders in aluminum recycling. We have reached 99% recycling. But we can do better with other materials, and we have to do better. Instead of sweeping the problem under the rug, let's talk about it. Let's try to understand where our waste is really going. Because every day that we hide the fact that the amount of waste we produce is increasing, especially electronic waste, which is currently growing the most, is a day wasted in which we could be making a difference. And I truly hope that this video was as fascinating for you as it was for me while I was studying to write this script. What information caught your attention the most in this video? Type it for me here in the comments. Thank you very much and see you next time.